So today we have a panel, and we have Gabrielle from LinkedIn, Holly from Coinbase, Jasmine from Netflix, and Simeon from Twitter. And we'll be talking about onboarding. So I'll invite the panelists to introduce themselves. So Gabrielle, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Gabrielle Miller-Messner. I'm an instructional engineer at LinkedIn. Been there for almost a year now, and I've been in software engineering and education for almost 7 years now. Now, kick it over to Holly.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Holly. I work at Coinbase. I've been there just over a year, and I own our engineering onboarding program. And I've been in learning and development for similarly about 7 years. And I'll pop it over to Jasmine.
Hey, I'm Jasmine, pronouns she, her, and I work at Netflix in developer education. I started in 2019. I'm a senior technical program manager. In a previous life, I worked in academia supporting all of our online services and learning tools. I launched our first online onboarding experience shortly after the pandemic started in 2020, and we just launched a new version in November, so I'm excited to share our lessons learned. Pass it on to Simone.
Hey, I'm Simeon Franklin, a longtime software engineer. I've been a technical instructor for the last decade or so. I've been with Twitter now for 8 years. I work on the Twitter University team, and we own technical learning for the engineering portion of the company.
Thank you all. And so my name is Marco. I'm at Plus Plus, but in my previous life, I was at Twitter University with Simeon. So we kind of come full circle. So super awesome to have everyone here. So thank you for finding time to join us today. The first question that we have is going to be on your team, and how is your team structured? How big is it? How many people do you serve? Where do you sit organizationally as well? So let's maybe go in just to kind of get an idea of scale and setup. So maybe we'll just go in the same order. So Gabrielle, do you want to take it first?
Yep. So we have a team of 8. It's the documentation and training team. So the docs folks get to work alongside the training folks, which is a great collaboration. And we have 4 technical writers, 1 program coordinator, and 3 instructional engineers globally. I'm actually the only instructional engineer doing US onboarding right now, but thankfully we're borrowing another facilitator from a different team, and he's very talented, and that's working out really well. We serve about 5,000 engineers. We run onboarding every 2 weeks. The classes are usually between 50 and 70 people, but we do have a couple bigger classes coming up that are going to be in the 90s. So we'll see how those go. And we're housed in the engineering org in the broader engineering org in a smaller org called Developer Productivity and Happiness.
Cool, thank you. Holly?
Cool, I'll jump in. Our team is 2 people right now, myself and a program coordinator, but we very excitedly just extended an offer that was accepted to our first teaching engineer. So he'll be coming on at the end of this year. So very, very excited about that. We serve about 1,300 engineers right now, but we're currently in hyper growth. So we are onboarding 600 engineers in Q4. So we've gone from class sizes of about like 20 to similarly to what Gabrielle was saying, our next week's boot camp is 90. So also interested to see how that goes. We run boot camp every 2 weeks in the US, and we have a program that runs once a month in APAC as well. And yeah, that's about it. I'll pass over to Jasmine.
Okay, so we have 4 senior technical program managers and 1 dev ed leader. So we have a team of 5, and everyone on our team has an engineering background. So we have 1 data scientist, and then everyone can either program in React, Node, Java, or Python. We serve about 2,200 engineers, and we have between 30 and 50 engineers that attend onboarding every month. We offer it ongoing, so you can start onboarding the day that you start at Netflix.
Cool. Simeon?
So we serve the experience org at Twitter, which is about 3,000 people, not all of whom are engineers, but it's the technical side of Twitter. The team that I'm on has 3 people who are technical instructors, and we've got 4 program managers. We've recently expanded how onboarding works. So we have a program manager based in Singapore now and a program manager based in London. So we have better global coverage. And we run onboarding every 2 weeks for people in kind of North America friendly time zones, about once a month for people in APAC. And we have just recently run our first European, Middle Eastern time zone friendly onboarding sessions. I think we've run 2 of those now, and those will probably be slightly irregular. Our session size has increased, and so we're between, I'd say 90 is a large session, usually around 50 to 75 would be a typical every 2-week cohort for us.
Very cool. Awesome. So I sort of alluded to this question earlier. So I guess, where do you sit organizationally? Is your concern part of engineering, or is it a concern that's maybe part of HR? We've seen different setups at different companies. So how does that work in your organization? So Gabrielle, I think you already mentioned you're part of engineering, right?
Yep, and that works really well because it's easier to communicate with the engineering leaders we need to communicate with, and also get access to the tools because we use the same tools as the people we're teaching. So.
Got it. So engineers serving engineering on and serving engineers and sitting in engineering. Got it. Yeah, Holly.
Yeah, we don't roll into engineering. We roll into L&D centrally. However, we do have a steering committee. So we have about 4 senior engineering managers that own different sub parts of the onboarding program. Then we have a sponsor who's within Eng, and then we report to the head of engineering every quarter for OKR setting and retrospectives as well. And our tech trainers are going to be embedded into our different Eng orgs. So they'll be kind of joining scrums and that kind of thing to make sure they have a close touch on the tooling that they'll be teaching.
Shortly after I started, our incredible engineering manager, who is the leader and founder of developer education, left and joined Apple. So although we miss her very much, we spent 2 months trying to figure out where we would have the most impact. So we talked to all of our stakeholders, and we ended up staying, we were already under the engineering umbrella, but we were in engineering tools and services, and we instead moved to the developer experience. So we work closely with them, but we are also highly aligned with our L&D teams and any other learning groups within Netflix.
This question makes me nervous. The university team used to be embedded in a team called Engineering Effectiveness that's basically internal engineering tools. So we're in the engineering org and surrounded by engineers. We've moved to a new org called Team Dev, and other teams within that space are teams like coaching that does things like agile and processes, strategy and ops. So it's a less engineering org, and we always have a relationship with L&D where they think we do exactly the same thing that they do, and we don't think so. And so that's kind of always there's some collaboration and a little bit of tension. I really appreciate directly reporting into the engineering org and feeling like my peers are engineers, and I think that's important for the kind of work that I do.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. There's always a little bit of a tension with this question, right? Like where we sit and where we report, and it has implications. So it's good to compare notes on that. So thank you for sharing. Cool. So another question that often comes up is how do you go about delivering training or onboarding specifically? Do you have dedicated instructors on your team? Do you rely on some internal subject matter experts that are volunteers that help out? So how does that work in your organization? So let's just kind of do the same order. So Gabrielle.
So yes and yes. We have sort of 4 major community members who support our new hires. There are dedicated instructors like me. We have subject matter experts who are leaders in different orgs like data or security, who come in and give more like expert talks. And then we have a pool of mentors for each persona. We have divided all of the engineers into 10 personas. And then there's a pool of mentors that that runs labs for each persona. And then there are persona track owners who actually made the content, who actually like created the labs. So they also sort of check in with the mentors from time to time and make sure that those labs stay updated and current.
Gabrielle, I wish we had that. That sounds so cool.
Sounds
awesome. So we did used to do all of our delivery with SMEs, and we found that super hard to scale because our SMEs are almost all PST based, and we're hiring super globally right now. So it was really difficult to like offer an equitable experience for our like APAC employees when we bootstrapped an office out there. So that and just kind of bandwidth issues at Coinbase as well. We're as I said, in hyper growth mode, and so engineers have really very little time, and none of their like job description is really going towards training. So we found it really difficult to get new presenters and to update content and all of that stuff. So because of those reasons, we've decided to pivot, as I said, to having teaching engineers. So we had our first one, as I said, it's starting at the end of the year, and we're looking to probably add to get 5 by the end of next year that will be globally based. And our understanding is that they would do kind of our foundational content that is based on competency mapping framework that we did in Q3 to identify like the foundational skills required for all engineers at Coinbase. And then we imagine, some SME involvement around our like crypto and blockchain specific content that is like very niche and specialized. So our imagining is kind of a mix of foundational teaching engineer delivery and then some specialized SME delivery as well. And then we also do have mentors, but we don't assign them based on like particular tracks right now. So yeah, a mixed model.
Got it. Thanks, Holly. And Jasmine?
So specific to onboarding, the Dev Ed team, we offer a general overview of engineering that we call bootcamp. And then our subject matter experts they volunteer to do the cloud security and tools trainings. We recently restructured our onboarding, so we have recorded versions of our lectures. And then the time that we spend live with the users are Ask Me Anything sessions that are facilitated by the subject matter experts. So it really maximizes the subject matter experts' time, and they're not having to redo the same presentation over and over again.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Simeon?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Jasmine on this. I mean, you're kind of asking specifically about onboarding. We also do continuing education, which has, we facilitate lots of SMEs providing training themselves. For the onboarding program itself, we recently restructured. There's less live instructor-based training in our onboarding than there used to be. And more of the live training, we're trying to focus more on experiences that have strong group and social components. So we're down to just a few courses that are kind of like traditional instructor-led trainings. And we've tended to lean more on our in-house instructor pool for those. Switching to, kind of the fully remote experience, I think has made training more difficult for people who don't do it a lot. It's a little harder to manage like the interaction part of classes. So we have a few folks who rotate in, especially in APAC and EMEA. We lean a little more heavily on volunteer instructors, but for our US-based onboarding, about 80% of the instructor-led training is done by folks on the team who are instructors.
Got it. So it sounds like it's mostly a mix of, it's all over the spectrum, but it's usually a mix of dedicated people as well as SMEs that are volunteering. So.
And we have tons of participation from people who are not instructors, but it's not exactly a class style format, and we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about modalities. Cool, thank you. So the next question is a little bit about scope, right? So what is the scope of your onboarding? In other words, how much is it? One model is you do very little, and then the responsibilities with the hiring manager. The other model is you do a lot of sort of general onboarding, and then the hiring manager gets somebody who's already plugged in in the way of your organization. So what is your philosophy? And this question is for Simeon specifically to the university.
Yeah, and I was interested in this question because we've changed our philosophy to some degree. We restructured our onboarding program in 2021, and started out by talking to tons of people who'd gone through onboarding recently, hiring managers who'd had folks join their team, and various subject matter experts throughout the company about how much should people know once they get through onboarding. And historically, we had a lot of technical content and really saw there being a greatest common denominator area of technical expertise that everybody who joined Twitter, everybody in a technical role who joined Twitter needs to know about, these variety of tools and technologies. And that would be, things like the Scala programming language, some in-house frameworks frequently used, say, for service development. And talking to users and managers, increasingly a smaller and smaller percentage of employees benefit from that stuff. And we have people who are data scientists working in like a GCP only environment now, who don't want to know about deploying services with Aurora, which is kind of only at Twitter style technology. So we've kind of pivoted a little. We're pulling back. We got a lot of signal that managers and attendees wish we did more explaining about engineering culture, the organizational structure of Twitter, some of the history of how we got where we're at, and some of the only at Twitter, parts of the tech stack, but less time doing like hands-on skills, just because you really have to segment those. And there was an ever increasing number of engineering profiles. Mobile engineers don't care what service engineers learn about. Service engineers aren't using the same tools as data scientists. And so that fragmentation drove us to do less technical onboarding and pushed some of the onboarding onto orgs. So we have big internal orgs, say Cortex is about 350 people, and it's the largest machine learning organization inside Twitter. There are individual ML engineers who work on all sorts of teams, but Cortex as a team provides like the ML platform. They are increasingly doing like more substantive onboarding focused on machine learning topics, and that stuff that isn't necessarily appropriate for every new technical person at Twitter to have to spend, say, a day and a half on those topics. And it's also something that my team can't provide that customized. I don't have the bandwidth probably to provide that customized onboarding for all those different engineering profiles. So basically negotiating with lots of organizations to do more of the specific technology to the specific role or specific org. And we're doing a little bit more about, welcome to Twitter. This is how the engineering organization works, and more history and context.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on something that's very interesting, which is that onboarding is not just about how Twitter works, but also how you work at Twitter. So there's this technical aspect, and then there's this organizational aspect that's like very social in nature as well. So that's I think an interesting observation there. So
and you've got the history to remember that our onboarding kind of had those two main tracks, how Twitter works and then how we work at Twitter. And for me personally, I'm much more interested in the how Twitter works. I love teaching technology courses. I would prefer to sit with engineers and build a service for a couple of days. But lots of people were like, especially the pandemic has really, going to a full-time remote company without having really deliberately thought about what that would mean has forced us to kind of reevaluate. And so we had lots of feedback from people like, I've never met anybody who's not on my team. I don't know how my team connects to the larger organization. I know that there are people over there who do data science, but I don't know how to get a hold of them. Just lots of questions that were kind of like organizational knowledge, and they're outside the scope of the sorts of things that the HR onboarding can provide. And so they kind of, it's not my favoriteest topics, but it turns out to be the most important stuff for people to hit the ground running in their first 30 and 60 days at Twitter.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Ian. So speaking of what's in scope, what's not in scope, with respect to technical versus organizational knowledge, so that's super interesting. I would love to learn from Jasmine how Netflix does that, and also how do you manage this workflow of onboarding people? Like, how do you know who to onboard? What tooling do you have in place? And I know you're doing all this at scale, so there's a lot of onboarding going on. And you mentioned how people can join onboarding the day they join Netflix. So how do you manage all that? Like, what's the workflow there?
Okay.
Jasmine, yeah.
So I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. So last night I put together an infographic, which will be the next slide, because I want to reduce cognitive overload. So this is a sample of our current workflow. This is what the engineering experience is. And we break everything up into episodes. And then in true Netflix fashion, you could watch the entire season and just binge watch it. And if you go down to the next slide, if I walk you through our toolbox, I think it'll give you a good understanding of how this workflow is set up. And if you want to see the graphic, I'm also going to put it in the chat so you can see the entire infographic together. Okay, so starting with Articulate 360, this is for interactive lessons. I'm sure a majority of the people here have used that before. We use Descript for audio and video editing. And what I love about Descript is it allows you to edit the video like a transcript. So it looks like a Google Doc and you're not dealing with a timeline. And it also has AI to auto remove filler words. So everything seems much more polished. Docebo is our learning management system where we store all our videos, our slides, our Articulate modules. It houses the entire virtual onboarding experience. And then we use Google Forms for feedback. And you should know that Netflix is a huge feedback culture. So we have to embed feedback opportunities whenever possible. And then with Google Slides, something that's really important to our dev ed team is that we model excellence. And we try to do that by dogfooding the same tools that the engineers use. So our engineers don't use Articulate 360, but they do use Google Slides. So we try to create as much as we can in the slides so they can copy our templates and they can use our slides for their own presentations. Google also allows you to embed audio clips into their slides. So what we've done is we've broken each slide into self-contained like modules and recorded audio narrated over it. And the advantage of that is because technology changes really quickly, so we can very easily extract a slide and replace it. Unfortunately, Google doesn't offer like an autoplay option. So I wrote an FFmpeg shell script that combines the audio clips with the Google screenshots and puts transitions in between the slides, and it will generate the video for us very quickly. So we can iterate in sort of like 2-week sprints as we want to update our bootcamp and just always keep it fresh. LinkedIn Learning. So we tend to only employ senior level engineers and they're already experts in their area. But if they want to explore areas beyond their areas of expertise, then LinkedIn Learning has thousands of foundational courses that they can watch on demand. MailChimp is awesome. It just has this new feature that came out, I think, a couple months ago called Customer Journey. And we have it set to sync with Workday. And it auto emails our engineers on the day they start to let them know this is how you can start onboarding. And then it will send them weekly reminders specific to where they are in their learning journey. Plus is our event management system for real-time event enrollments, and it does much more than that. But for onboarding, we use Tracks for auto-enrollment of all our new engineers into our Ask Me Anything live sessions. Stack Overflow, we have an internal version, and we have a new at Netflix tag that we use, and we apply that to any questions that we think would be beneficial for new engineers. And then when we have our Ask Me Anything sessions, we can then populate Stack Overflow with those questions. Tableau, whenever we have a system, any of these systems that has an API, we load that into our data portal, and then we can visualize it with Tableau dashboards. And last but not least is Wistia. We use this to store our videos so we can embed them in multiple places and we can get the analytics centrally. One of the really cool things is I can see where people like stop watching or where they rewatch. So I recently uploaded a how to set up your laptop for development video, and I can see like 70% of our engineers rewatch the Docker section. And I know that we're also having issues with Silicon Macs and Docker. So I know I should probably go back in there and make some modifications to that video. And whenever we can find out information that doesn't require us to directly survey our engineers, it's really powerful for us. Whoa, okay, that was a lot.
That's super cool. And thank you for putting all this together. I'm sure this is a lot of people find this valuable. There's always the question of what the learning stack looks like. So super awesome, Jasmine. Thank you.
No worries.
Yeah, very cool. Cool. So, so the next question is about modalities, right? So Jasmine, you just showed us a bunch of tools, and you mentioned a whole bunch of different things, from live learning to e-learning to you touched on AMAs, and there's also mentorship and group projects and in-person async, etc. So how do you think about modalities? And this question is for Gabrielle and for Holly. In terms of your onboarding, like what kind of different modalities do you use and how does it all fit together?
Right now, it's mostly 3 main modalities. So there's live Zoom sessions, which are mostly lecture style. There are labs that are small group labs led by mentors. And then there are asynchronous modules, some of them are courses, some of them are shorter modules that are mostly videos paired with some kind of challenge, some kind of quiz style challenge. And the sort of modality that we're trying to bring in more is the idea of an activity or a small group challenge that isn't like a longer lab. It's more of an ad hoc, like, okay, throwing you in a breakout room to work on this challenge that might be like a short answer question, or it might be like a short code challenge.
Got it. Cool. And Holly, how do you structure this?
So right now, probably not great, but we are talking about our future state. So we're pivoting our model right now with the idea of using kind of async video / like documentation dependent on the evergreen nature of the content. I think that's a real issue in tech learning versus other types of learning, is our content changes so quickly. It's it's hard to, like as Jasmine said, like swap stuff in and out unless you're like very intentional about that. But the idea is we really want to do kind of a bit of a build your own adventure experience for folks. And the reason for this is we're looking to add a lot of new geographies very, very rapidly, as well as scale very rapidly as well. So we're probably going to double or triple the Eng kind of organization next year, and we're probably going to add maybe 5 new geos. And so we just need to be able to like have this like self-service model as much as possible. So we're looking to have these like short kind of micro learning async modules that are then supported by group projects. So we have group projects that are based on our paved road technologies for front end, back end data, and then some like specialty modules for like our crypto engineers, site reliability engineers, et cetera, that you can kind of tag on. And then kind of the office hours for any common issues that people are having that they're kind of running into, to be able to have like a live touch point. But the expectation is you complete async first as like a guardrail before you come to a live session. So we're not kind of repeating the same stuff over and over again. We want to reduce that right now. We offer mentorship, but we're looking to think about that next year, if it makes sense to still offer mentorship, because our project work is all like small groups led by a project lead, and everybody's also assigned an onboarding buddy. So we're looking at like how a bootcamp mentor fits in. The reason we have mentorship right now is to reduce siloing. As Simeon said, I think in the remote first environment, it's a real issue. Engineers are joining their teams and kind of losing that high level context that they need to be effective. And if you want a fungible engineering organization, you need to be very intentional about building those networks early and putting them in touch with the people they need to be in touch with. So we're very intentional about aligning them with a mentor that's not even from their platform, not from their org. So they at least have somebody to like vibe with culturally. And the other thing we're very intentional about is the social element. So we have a number of social activities that we run during bootcamp as well, such as like build your knowledge tree. So everybody like in the first week has like a whole list of everybody's expertise, so they know who to go to in their cohort for like specific expertise in like Golang, for example. And then we also have kind of a bingo opportunity as well, where people can get to know each other. So we are really trying to index heavily on the social aspect as well. And that's kind of what we think about in terms of modality.
Got it. And one thing you touched on is keeping the onboarding in sync with technology, because it's technology internally always changes. It's a moving target. So how do you do that? And so the next question is right around that. Like, what are some of the challenges you face with maintaining your onboarding program, and specifically around how do you keep it in sync with what you're onboarding on, so the internal systems and tools. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, how do you, I guess the hot topic is remote work, and specifically remote onboarding. And so what are the implications of that? So maybe we'll start with Jasmine on that, and then Simeon.
I mean, there's so many challenges to cover, but I'll go with the ones that I have a solution for. One of the things that is really difficult and most beneficial for onboarding is understanding what it is that your engineers need to know to increase engineering velocity so you can get them from 0 to 60 the fastest. And at Netflix, each of our engineering teams has a team-specific onboarding doc that they give to their new hire. So we tried to collect as many of these as we could, and then we ran them through natural language processing so we could extract the keywords and get a count, and then a regular expression to extract the links. And we created like the lowest common denominator. Like this is the overlap of the content that was the most useful. And we took that and we made a website, which is like our onboarding landing page or portal, which has all the general information that we feel is important for all engineers to know. That way, as our teams are maintaining their docs, they only need to focus on their team specific information, and that dev ed focuses on that general information.
I love how you solve everything with everything is an engineering problem, right?
It is, yes. That's how we tackle it on our team.
I love it. Simeon, what kind of challenges are you facing? You mentioned a couple of pivots and a couple of issues you ran into recently.
Yeah, I want to focus more on the remote and social side of that. And it was honestly pretty shocking to me doing a bunch of interviews with folks. We ran a survey of all of that had onboarded in the last couple of years, and then asked if we could have follow-up one-on-one interviews, and I think the team did close to 100 one-on-one interviews with new engineers and hiring managers and so forth, kind of about how the onboarding process had worked for them. And one of the strongest signals we got was not a signal I went looking at all, which was the real problem of kind of social connection in the remote first world. And people recognizing that people who had onboarded before we went remote first had social connection to their cohort. They still like get together on Slack or Google Meet with folks that they'd onboarded with and had kind of that connection. People at Twitter tend to know the folks on your team. You know, you have daily stand-ups with people on your team and you see them a lot, but that siloing is a problem now. There's no longer, there's no longer the option of like meeting people when you go to get coffee, sitting down at a random table and saying, hey, can I sit here? And, just meeting people that you wouldn't otherwise meet. And that, wasn't something my team saw as our problem historically. We did not, Marco, we did not design onboarding at Twitter initially thinking strongly about like the social experience, but you got one by accident because it was just the default experience of everybody being in the room together. And being in the room together, I used to teach onboarding classes, say, hey, I'm gonna get lunch, I'm gonna bring it back here. I'm happy to hang out and talk with anybody. There were just lots of opportunities for those impromptu social experiences. So with that feedback, redesigning our onboarding, just like everything that every piece of content we still needed to teach, we needed to think about how to make that more social. So some examples, there are lots of now converted to async courses that are kind of like, internal tools and technology. You got to get on Slack, you got to get on Jira, and all those touch points are now, you have to interact with somebody else. You got to get signed up for Jira, got to make a ticket in this project, assign it to somebody else with 3 truths and a lie, and you can't close the ticket until they've successfully chosen the 3 truths and a lie kind of thing. Like embed a social experience in the little jump on board internal tools, sorts of things. We do some training on processes. So like, what are the company's top level objectives? What are the top level engineering projects going on? And we made that, this is actually the thing I'm probably proudest of our redesign. We have a couple of async series that are mostly video of walking through what the company's top level objectives are and how Twitter is structured as an organization. We have some pillars inside the experience team. And then people basically, we call it the treasure hunt. People are expected to go back to their team, find a project that has been completed or is in process that maps to our top level objectives, fill out a slide, find everybody in their cohort who's in the same pillar inside the experience org, get together and present, pick a winner or 2, so just the most interesting presentations as a group, and then present that to everybody the next day. So that experience has people getting to know folks who are in their larger organization and having a lot of context on what their larger organization is up to. Technically speaking, these are all kind of engineering projects. And then some exposure to, hey, what is engineering as a whole up to? And lots of time spent together just talking and chatting. And I see somebody on the chat asking if we've written this up, and we haven't. And this is actually, I go to the lightning talks. We have lightning talks then the next day. where the we go through as many presentations as we can, but at least 2 from each of the pillars of the experience org. And I attend that whether I'm facilitating or not, because it's a fascinating way to keep your ground to the, your ear to the ground and hear what are we up to? What are projects that are in process? Like we just launched this new project that applies to our top level, objective of velocity, say, and what is it going to look like in 6 months? And so I find out, what's going on with the company from the new hires, and we explicitly pitch it as, you're here to tell us what's going on. That kind of flipping that, like trying to think first about what is going to be the social consequence of learning this piece of knowledge with basically everything in onboarding has been fun, and has forced us to expand the modalities, and even we train on a process like DAS and making decisions, and we don't do that by lecturing our way through an acronym. We have a guest speaker come in and talk about an important decision that was made, and let people ask them about how that decision was made. And so kind of find out a bit by osmosis about a process that they have a separate training on. We have a panel where we just invite a variety of people looking for diversity of identities and diversity of roles. And it is a panel where people introduce themselves. And then the focus is basically like, what does it mean to be successful at Twitter? And so people ask questions of, the female data scientist and the site reliability engineer who's been full-time remote for 8 years, and just see all the different roles, all the different personalities, and kind of realizing that is our job has really changed how I think about onboarding.
I love how we underestimated the value of social connections at the social networking company. So yeah, cool. Thank you. So then the next question is on scaling. So how do you think about scaling onboarding, right? So and doing it properly and doing it efficiently as well. So Jasmine, do you want to start first?
Sure. I mean, normally people talk about how they make their videos or put their videos online in the learning management system, and that's how they're scaling. What we're trying to do is build an army of future subject matter expert volunteers. So in episode 5 of our onboarding, we introduce our new hires to Netflix's culture of selflessly sharing information openly and broadly. So we're giving them this behind the scenes tour where we walk them through all their opportunities to engage. And this tour guide is meant to drive enrollment in our continuous learning classes, our engineering communities, and volunteer opportunities beyond engineering bootcamp. So it's our hope that these new hires are going to be our future mentors and our future training facilitators. So what we want to do is plant that seed as early as possible to help them grow into a contributing member for our developer education team. And that's how we're hoping to scale.
Got it. It's always interesting how usually when to your point, when we say scaling, people usually think, oh, we're just going to make it into a video, but it's really not that. It's still about the human touch and live experiences and face-to-face, and you're scaling that. So that's cool to see. Gabrielle, how about you? How do you think about scaling LinkedIn?
I definitely want to plus one what Jasmine said about getting that learning culture, getting buy-in to that learning culture during onboarding, because it's pretty baked. The learning culture is pretty baked into the culture at LinkedIn, but new hires are just they're just so ready to get involved. It's great. But mostly how we scale onboarding at LinkedIn is through our mentor tracks. That's how we're able to, teach 10 different sets of skills, with one instructor. And we're just really lucky to have these really robust mentor pools. And the mentors, they don't get a whole lot of training. We give them some best practices, we give them a guide, and then they shadow another mentor. But it's a pretty safe space for learning because they're working in a small group of their peers, so they learn pretty fast.
So enabling and encouraging internal SMEs to share themselves, essentially, in that way to indoctrinate people into the culture. Cool, thank you. So this question always comes up, right? Like, so how do you measure success? Like, what does that look like in your organization? and yeah, what's important to you. So maybe we'll just do sort of round robin, who and ask, how do you think about this? Gabrielle, I guess maybe start with you first.
Sure. So pretty typical measures are, self-reported feedback surveys, NPS. We measure the NPS of those. Each presenter gets a score. And then the content kind of gets a separate score. But I think the two most useful measures of success we've had sort of historically have been time to first commit and time to 10th commit. That's where kind of the real money cost becomes obvious. So I would recommend trying to get those numbers.
Got it. So that's that 0 to 60 basically experience, right? How quickly you ramp up new hires. Awesome. Holly, how about you? How do you think about this?
We actually have been mulling this over a lot. So Gabrielle, we also tried the time to first and time to 10th. For us, we found that it was not really giving us the level of detail we wanted, because no two commits are the same. And so we had to define, what should a L6 engineer, what should their time to first commit be versus an L3 engineer, right? They're not the same complexity of problem. Different teams have different understandings of how quickly a commit should be, and the time to commit doesn't always demonstrate the quality of the commit for us as well. So we found it was quite messy, the data, and I think just because maybe we don't have enough people to have some of that stuff locked in yet. Maybe when we have a larger engineering organization, it would give us more of a pulse, but for us, we're still quite small, so it was very variable. So what we're looking at is self-assessment of confidence on our paved roads / competencies, manager assessment at 60 days on those self-same competencies. And then at Coinbase, we have a high-performing culture where you're expected to be fully effective at 90 days. So we have a pulse at 45 and 90 days that all managers do for their new hires to say whether folks are on track or off track. So we're also looking at that data to evaluate. And then something that I'm interested in looking at is kind of the common instances that we're seeing in code reviews and the time taken to get something through code review, and whether we can look at that data and those metrics to see if there are kind of common errors that we're seeing across the board, that we launch a new training and we see kind of the code review time goes from X to Y. And there's some cool Pluralsight tools, there's a Pluralsight flow tool that starts to monitor a lot of that stuff through Git. So we're also looking at kind of some tooling around that as well. So again, not easy. I think everybody does it super differently, and we're just trying to see what makes sense with us being kind of small and not having the same amount of data that I think a lot of other larger companies do. But yeah, we're really looking to get people fully effective at 90 days. And so that's kind of the biggest thing that we're looking at, is those effective metrics that we're capturing.
Got it. Thanks, Holly. Jasmine, do you want to go next?
I'll go really fast. We're working really closely with our developer experience teams, and they're identifying where the engineering blockers are. So we're being very intentional on and using OKRs as well to figure out, okay, these are the engineering blockers. These are how we're going to measure that these were reduced. And these are the efforts that DevEd's going to put in order to help reduce those engineering blockers. So an example might be a migration to Kubernetes. And we're using Titus, which is Netflix's version of Kubernetes. But we want to make it as easy as possible using learning. And we'll be measuring how many people are migrated over and what their experience is.
This discussion, everything people have talked about in terms of searching for metrics, it always feels slippery. We've had some experience doing things like time to first commit, looking at how much time gets spent in code reviews, and I have yet to find statistical measures that I really like. What we've always done the Kirkpatrick level 1 of did you like the training, and there's some value there. Open-ended comments from people is where I find the most value in detecting problems. And in measuring, impact, I have run several programs recently where we're trying to specifically measure changes in behavior. So trying to get up to level 3, at least kind of on that Kirkpatrick level. And so, do some data science training. And is there it's sometimes hard to do individualized measures. So ideally, I would say, did people who took this training then go on to use this tool in their, in their day job? Sometimes that's difficult to get from the team for data privacy reasons internally. But frequently we'll at least look at is the, say, the DAU for this particular tool trending upwards since we've launched a training program specifically tied to it. And I love measures like that. The other thing that people said that I've grown to be less skeptical of over time is self-assessments from engineers are actually reasonably effective. Just asking an engineer, rate yourself, are you a amateur, intermediate, experienced, or expert on this skill, gets you really reasonable answers frequently, and revisiting those self-assessments over time to see whether they change or not turns out to be a useful signal.
So having people self-evaluate themselves and report on that. Cool. So I love how you mentioned measuring things can be a slippery slope, but I guess there's another question, which is like, how do you think about quality, right? Like, what does it mean to have quality onboarding? And there are multiple axes there to consider, right? Like, one is the modality, right? Like, is it, self-paced e-learning versus in-person? So that could be one axis. The other one could be using volunteer instructors versus on-staff instructors, right? So how do you think in terms of quality? What does that mean to you and your onboarding program? So Gabrielle, do you want to maybe take a stab at it first?
So I think quality doesn't have a whole lot to do with modality and has a lot more to do with design. And when I say design, I don't mean like using a particular quizmaker tool or like having fancy icons. I mean like careful consideration of what the learner's needs are and what is the behavior that you're trying to influence, and trying to match that with the tools that you have. We have such a diversity of learning experiences that we can design that combine in-person and asynchronous and remote and different kinds of media and different kinds of social structures too. And so we should use all of those tools, and we should be thinking about how to serve different kinds of learners. Everyone likes something a little different.
Got it. Thank you. Holly, how do you think about quality at Coinbase?
Yeah, I would really echo what Gabrielle said. I think it's being super intentional about the way that you're putting an experience together to kind of meet the learner where they are. I really believe a lot in kind of just-in-time learning and being able to like take that more micro learning approach so that folks can get what they need in the moment that they need it. I think with all the best will in the world, you're never going to have somebody go through a boot camp, however long your boot camp might be, and feel like they fully got to grips with everything you're trying to cover. It's just too much content, and you're joining a new company, it's all overwhelming. Remote first, I don't think it's helped with that either. So I think it's, really trying to think about that just-in-time learning approach, which is what we're trying to do. And really trying to build, rather than like persona-based learning, like problem-based learning. So really breaking down like what are the actual current like tasks for each role within engineering, like what are the things that they do. I had a lot of engineering managers tell me, for example, we need AWS, and I'm like, well, what within AWS do you need? Let's be specific, right? So I think we're trying to really break it down to be super micro on like specific tasks that people are trying to achieve, and then having that be accessible and searchable, and like like a YouTube or a TikTok even of learning content that people can get when they need it. And one thing I'm very passionate about, and it might be because I have lived internationally, is that equitable experience for international. And I find that that's something that we're not doing great right now, candidly. And that's a big focus area for me, is that I believe that regardless of where you start a company, your experience should be at least equitable with wherever everybody else is. And I think that having more of a just-in-time approach helps with that as well. I do feel like our international engineers currently are somewhat underserved by what we offer, and it's somewhat kind of an afterthought. And so that's something I would really like to focus on. And I think as well, within that, it's the localization of content. And that's why I'm really pushing to have an international team, because, you know, there's a lot of US training, for example, that uses sport. You guys love a sports reference. You love a sports reference. And it took me about 4 years to know what like at-bats meant. Had no idea what that meant at all. So I think that, you know, really think about localization, not just translation, but, you know, metaphors, idioms that make sense with a cross-cultural context is super important as well. So again, part of that, like meeting the learner where they are, that's a couple of things that I really think about when I think about quality.
Nothing more tired than a baseball analogy.
Very cool. And I love the TikTok of learning. Jasmine, how about you? What's quality at Netflix in terms of onboarding?
Quality of, I wasn't prepared for this one. I guess because I would say because I come from academia and we'd been migrating or moving towards online learning for like 20 years, that when I joined Netflix, I was really shocked that everything was in person. So one of the benefits of the pandemic was it was a catalyst for us to start moving things online. And originally we were just like, let's just get this online. It's just a recorded lecture. But eventually we moved to the point where we're like, okay, we want this to be interactive. We want this to be like a scavenger hunt. We want this to be a learning experience. We want to identify what the evergreen content is that would be recorded versus the content that that would be in an Ask Me Anything type session. So I think that as long as you are following instructional design best practices and you're trying to understand or realize what it is that you want people to take away from that training, and you are doing some sort of like assessment in that process, that you can still have very high quality engagement online.
The only unique thing I could add to the discussion, I mean, you know, echoes to lots of what everybody has said so far. For lots of general engineering education, I can rely just on the opinion of the attendee as to whether the class was a success. I have a senior engineer who attends a class on a particular technology that's a couple hours. At the end, they say the class was great. Class was great. For onboarding specifically, people don't yet know how effective their onboarding was when they're new to the company. And really moving past, I liked the class, or even I attained the learning goals of the class. Like those are good questions to ask for a class, but really asking people, you know, the 30, 60, 90 day later, hey, was your onboarding relevant to the task you went to do on your team? And also expanding, understanding that my customer is not just the attendee, but is also the EM, and frequently the EM has more context to know whether the attendee learned the things that they needed to know. And so making them kind of an intentional part of the metrics that I'm trying to build to measure whether or not we're being successful.
Got it. Yeah, and so as just as an FYI, this topic of measuring success and like what to measure, it keeps coming up, and it's something that's important. So in January, we're going to have both a roundtable discussion on developer productivity and how to measure it, and also another panel where we're going to talk about some of this, what metrics people look at and how that works at different companies. So stay tuned for that conversation in January. So with that, the final question, and this is my favorite, is what are you looking back at your onboarding? What is something that you're particularly proud of? And I'll also add a twist to this. Looking forward, what are you excited about creating next? And let's do this for fun in reverse order. So Simeon, do you want to start first?
And I could be brief because I think I've shared the thing I'm most proud of. When the pandemic hit and we went fully remote, we essentially took our all instructor-led training and just, you know, put it on a Zoom instead. And so there was no kind of thought of designing for the change in format, and that made teaching more difficult. It was brutally hard for attendees. You totally can pay attention for 6 hours in person, and you totally cannot pay attention for 6 hours a day on a screen. people previously were, flown to SF, and so time zone considerations were not a problem. And now suddenly we had people from around the world staying up to take, classes in PSD. So realizing those problems as the pandemic hit, and our redesign took too long. But we did spend a lot of time identifying who our customers actually were and listening to them, and delivering the more async experience, which is more time zone friendly to folks, more bite-sized pieces of content, and doubling down on kind of what is the experience of the learner, thinking about that kind of through the whole thing, and therefore integrating a bunch of social interactions into all the knowledge transfer that goes on. That's probably what I'm proudest of.
Thank you. And what's on the horizon for you?
So moving to better. So right now, if my VP of engineering says, what onboarding do people take? We can say they have an HR onboarding. They have this experience onboarding if they're technical. Every team does an onboarding, and so individual teams, the 5 to 7 people with a manager, have an onboarding, and they're expected to have some common features like, say, a mentor and an onboarding doc. And we offer guidance in this area, but not a lot of help. The missing piece is org level onboarding, and org level onboarding, some orgs are doing a great kick-ass job at this and say, welcome to the org. Here's the stuff you need to know in 30, 60, 90 days. Here are the technologies that are common to your job role in this particular org. And some teams are doing nothing about it, or doing things and we don't know about it. So finding everybody who's doing onboarding right now, corralling all those cats kind of in the same direction, and then improving quality where we can is one of my focuses.
Cool, thank you. Jasmine, how about you?
We're loosely coupled at Netflix, which means our engineering orgs can be very siloed. So what I really love doing is building the bridges between those orgs and writing the story that explains the entire engineering ecosystem. So I recently spent like 2 months trying to figure out how we code in every aspect, from front end, back end, database at Netflix, and being able to tell that like general story that every engineer should understand, so they have empathy when they're going through their onboarding and as they continue their work, to see how they might be impacting other organizations within Netflix.
Cool. So is that coming? Is that going to be available on Netflix? Are we going to be able to watch it?
I mean, I would love to do a conference presentation in the future on it. I think it'd be really useful.
Oh
Cool.
man, I'd love to.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Holly, how about you? What are you most proud of, and what's on the horizon?
I think that, just to be super real, like I'm proud that nothing has broken this year, because, we went from having 1 bootcamp a month of like 15 people when I joined to now we have 90 in the US, and we bootstrapped India, and thank you. Yeah, everything is still like lights are on, right? So I'm proud of that. We're hypergrowth is something that is new to me to scale as quickly as we're scaling. So I know a lot of your companies have already done that, but we definitely are in it right now. So I'm proud of that. And then what I'm most excited about is our redesign being implemented next year. So I'm super psyched to get our teaching engineers on board. I think it's going to help us scale massively. Super excited to offer, as I said, that more like equitable experience for our EMEA folks, our Middle Eastern folks, and our APAC folks. And then, really want to move to this more like modularized project approach, to have not just like our paved roads, but those specialty modules for like our very unique engineers in like blockchain technology, crypto engineering, cryptography, and those kind of things that are quite unique to the Coinbase culture. So all of that stuff I'm super excited about.
Got it. Thank you. And finally, Gabrielle, what are you the most excited about, and what's on the horizon for onboarding at LinkedIn?
I think the thing that I'm most proud about is is the LinkedIn learning culture. It's very, we are a company about professional growth, right? So it's very baked in that everybody's ready to give back and help other people grow, and that for any given onboarding class, there are like 15 people in some kind of a teaching role, and it sounds like that would be impossible to accomplish, and it's actually pretty easy because it's just expected. That's just what we do. And also we have a really amazing program coordinator who makes those people show up on time in the right place and stuff. But that's what I'm proud of, is our culture, and it's really a community effort. The thing that I see happening on the horizon is we really want onboarding and, like, you know, sort of the early hire learning experience to be seen as a journey, and to be seen as a customizable journey that is going to be different for each persona or different for each role. And in order to make that more customizable, right now you know, the mentor track, the labs are pretty dialed in, but there are lots of other components that could be taken out for some roles, could be made longer for some roles, shortened for some roles. And so we really want to make it more more personalized.
Got it. Cool. Cool. Well, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. I think that was all we had for the panel. We have a couple more minutes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to just chime in the chat. As a reminder, if you have any questions, you can always ask them as well via Slack. So please join the Slack channel if you're not on it already. Cool. Well, with that, I just wanted to thank the panelists for your time and for sharing how you do the magic of onboarding at your place. Yeah, thank you.